Hello everyone, I'm the Saxy Gamer, and today we're here for yet another look at some of the Humankind OpenDev stuff, where today we'll be taking a look at Scenario 2. So these scenarios, there's actually like 4 case scenarios in Scenario 2, each of which is focused on a slightly different part of the combat in the game. So we're going to go through all 4 of these cases and just give some of my impressions on how the combat feels, how it plays out, and how it compares to some of the other games that I've played. So let's go ahead and get started right away with the first of the cases, which is a confrontation between the Hittites and the Egyptians here. So you play as the Hittites, and you have these cavalry units that are pretty much just war chariots, and you're fighting against some of the Egyptian chariot archers that are called like Markabanas or something like that. I don't exactly remember. But the terrain here is that there's kind of like a raised plateau around the outside of the battle area, and you start in this lower down plains area that has a river running through it. And this scenario really kind of emphasizes how important some of the terrain is whenever you're fighting in this game, because so the first time I played through this scenario, I didn't really know where the enemy archers were going to be and things of that sort, and I was kind of like roaming around trying to find them, and I stayed mostly down in the plains part and tried to fight up, out of there. But that was a really, really bad idea. So one of the other things in this game is that whenever you're on a river tile, or I think if you're fighting across a river tile, then you lose a lot of combat strength. I mean, similarly to how Civ is, but unlike Civ, even in this game, if you are standing on a river tile, I'm pretty sure that you still lose combat strength, which is a little bit, I don't know, it's a little bit strange, I think, because unlike Civ, the rivers are on tiles instead of between tiles, so I'm not exactly 100% sure how it works, but the combat penalty that you get from rivers feels pretty insane, and so does the one whenever you're attacking up hills. If you try to attack up hills, you are just gonna get you're gonna get obliterated, and we'll see this more in the next scenario as well. But the first time I tried this and I was staying down on that low ground, I got beat pretty heftily by these chariot archers that the Egyptians had. But coming back around to the second time I played this, I quickly got up onto the high ground, and from there it was very easy to win this scenario. The cavalry units that I had pretty heftily tore away the chariot archers that the Egyptians had, because they were very weak whenever you get in the melee range. So I think that part of the balance was good, that the archer units, whenever you get within melee range of the archer units, they do fall pretty fast, which I think is pretty balanced. So this scenario just kind of started to show off some of the terrain effects, and I think that the terrain effects are pretty good. It's going to take me a little bit more of just playing the game in order to get used to them a little bit more, but it was definitely nice to see that it actually has a pretty significant impact on the game as to where you are positioned, because this is going to be important for any battle that you're fighting, or that you're, going on the offensive, or for where you position your cities and things like that, because if you have a nice defensive position with lots of high ground and stuff like that, then it's going to be much easier to defend than it would be if you were just in open plains like that. So overall, I definitely do like the terrain effects that they have going here. They can maybe use a little bit of adjustment to make them maybe just a little bit less extreme, and we'll especially take a look at that in the next scenario. But overall, pretty good, my impressions from the first thing. One thing that did start to irritate me, though, was that the combat animations feel really, really slow, so I eventually turned them up to like 3 times speed or something like that, which is the maximum you can turn them to, but I do think that the combat animations are kind of painfully slow for just how the game feels in general. Let's go ahead and take a look at the second battle case here. So this one was a battle between the Persians and the Greeks, kind of in a very mountainous area of the map, and the goal was, you're playing the Persians and you're trying to attack some Greek city, so you want to take out the army that's along the way, and that's kind of the scenario of the battle here. So this one was very difficult, I thought. This one was focused around, so like the main point of this was to show off kind of reinforcements and things like that if you have nearby armies. And I did think that the reinforcement thing was quite nice, but let me talk about some of the difficulty of this scenario. So in this one, the Greeks have hoplites, which get, pretty much like the typical hoplite bonus of they get extra combat strength when they're adjacent to other hoplites. And man, with that, plus the fact that they were on top of hills, it was nearly impossible to, win this with just straight up trying to run at them. So from a defensive standpoint, I feel like this could be really, quite cheese, just because whenever they were up there on those hills, there was only 1 or 2 areas that you could walk up in order to be able to actually get at them. And if you tried to fight uphill towards these hoplites, you would deal like 5 to 10 damage and receive like 40 to 50. So you would just get absolutely wiped over and over and over again if you tried to just brute force your way against the Greeks here. So what ended up actually working here was you had to kind of bait them out by showing only a small portion of your army. And then once they came out, then you could bring in the reinforcements on your own high ground to then go and take out their hoplites. So this was another really interesting strategy thing, and it's something that honestly took me a little bit in order to figure out how to do it, because at first I was just bringing in all my troops on the first turn of the battle, but that's not quite the case. So it was kind of cool to discover this, you know, as what the strategy that was intended actually was, and it was nice and interesting to see, you know, just how much of a difference it makes if you're able to actually gain the high ground once again. Similar to the first case where, you know, gaining the high ground means absolutely a ton in this game, and it makes a huge difference when you're fighting people. So this one, I really kind of felt like the high ground was kind of cheese a little bit, because if you find choke points like this, it becomes very, very difficult to win a battle. I mean, at least, so granted, I didn't have ranged units or anything, so I wasn't able to, you know, just poke at them from afar, but if you're trying to just run up on high ground, you get absolutely destroyed, and it kind of feels a little bit, I don't know, I feel like the high ground might be just a little bit overpowered, but I don't want it to be nerfed too much, but it does feel just a little bit cheese, especially in cases like this where you deal virtually no damage and take, you know, an absolute ton from it. As far as the reinforcement system is concerned, though, I think it is quite cool. So I believe that, you know, so battles can go across multiple game turns. So there's like battle turns and there's game turns. There's 5 battle turns per game turn. So I believe that if you move in another army in between game turns, I believe that then you will get them available for the battle on the next turn as well. Don't quote me on that 100% because I haven't actually gotten to try it, because that's not part of these OpenDev things, but either way, the reinforcement system felt pretty cool, and I am definitely a fan of that. I think that adds a lot more depth to battles and things like that, and just as a whole, I feel like battles in this game are going to be much more, you know, much more in-depth than they are in something like Civ 6, where it's kind of just like throw a mob of units at something. In here, it definitely feels like there's a lot more actual individual unit strategy and things like that that need to go into your battles in order to make them successful. That being said, as a new player though, I did find the combat to be quite frustrating. Whenever you don't quite understand all of, you know, the terrain systems and the modifiers and things like that, this game does feel kind of frustrating from the combat standpoint, because you just don't understand why you're getting absolutely obliterated and how people can attack you down from cliffs, but you can't attack them back up them. It's, you know, it's just a very, it's a little bit of a frustrating system at first, but so I think that what they definitely need for this game is a bit better of the, you know, some better combat tutorials that kind of show off these things, you know, maybe something that would walk you through them whenever the full game releases, that you can play through these scenarios, you know, scenarios like this, but it actually just walks you through, you know, kind of step by step what you're expected to do, so that way it's very easy to learn these systems, because as I mentioned, even as someone who's played a lot of strategy games, and, you know, obviously I have hundreds, if not thousands of hours in Civ, it still took me a while to actually win these scenarios, especially this one, so the difficulty curve is definitely a little bit higher in this game than it is in other strategy games. Scenario 3, or I guess Case 3 I should say, because it's all still part of Scenario 2 of OpenDev, but Case 3 was a city siege type of case where you are playing as the Vikings and attacking the French. So in this one, you know, obviously as I mentioned, it is city siege, so you do get some siege equipment and things of that sort, and plenty of units, and this one, in my opinion, was the most fun out of all the cases. I really enjoyed how the city siege feels in this game. So you can see here that this is a quite large city. It's very many tiles, and it's got all these walls around it. It's full of, you know, all these military units and things like that. But so the thing with the trebuchets in this game is you use them, and whenever you shoot adjacent tiles that are adjacent to the wall, it breaks the wall, and then you can move your units in. So normally, if you try to move units straight over walls, it costs all your movement, and it's really hard to do, because then you're just going to get swarmed whenever you're on the other side. So the strategy here was kind of, so what I had done was I was using my trebuchets to attack the enemy crossbowmen, that way they wouldn't just be able to shoot out, and then I would eventually break down the walls and start flooding in my units, and whenever I played this scenario the first time, I lost. It was difficult, but not quite as difficult as the previous case. But this one, as I mentioned, was very fun. I really enjoy how the siege engines feel in this game, and I'm really excited to see what more they have for them. You know, bombards and all that stuff I think would be really cool. Everybody already loves trebuchets, so that's already a big plus that those are even in the game. This one didn't have as much of the, tactical terrain feeling type of thing here, because most of this terrain was, there was some ability to get high ground and stuff like that, but a big part of it was just effectively using your trebuchets in order to soften up the enemy defenses before going in on your own. One thing that I do want to mention with this case, though, is that it seems like the damage preview for the trebuchets was not working correctly, so whenever I would target enemy crossbow and things like that, it would say, the little preview up top would say like 40 to 50 damage estimated, but then it would do like 95, and then whenever I would target enemy horsemen, it would say like 5 to 15, but then it would do like 40 or 50, so if any of the Amplitude devs are watching this, or anybody happens to see this that is related to that, that is a problem that does need to be fixed, because it was quite confusing on determining what targets to attack at first, because I thought that I was only going to do like 5 damage to these horsemen, but then whenever I would actually shoot them, it would do like 40. So if I had known that originally, then maybe my battle battle strategy would have changed a little bit. But overall, as I mentioned, this was a very fun case, and one that I quite enjoyed. I'm really excited to see city sieging actually in the full game. So case 4 is the last one, and it was fairly similar to like case 1 and 2, where it's just another very simple battle here. So in this one, you're playing the Japanese, and you're defending this time against the Koreans. So all the other ones were attacking scenarios, but this was the only defensive one. And in this one, you are positioned on top of a hill, and unlike some of the other ones, you do have forests to make use of this time. So the forest will give you a defensive bonus against missile fire, so that's like ranged units or the mortars that the Koreans had in this game. And this one I thought was pretty okay. It didn't show that much, in terms of different things compared to the other scenarios. One thing that was nice is that in this one you got to actually feel how the ranged units feel to use. You actually got ranged units on your own side this time. And I'd say that they felt pretty okay. They felt, I don't know, they felt maybe a little bit underpowered, but at the same time, I feel like they would be absolute cheese if I was playing against them and just getting melted by them. So I think that they're in a pretty good spot in terms of balance. Their range is pretty good. As I mentioned, I think that it's pretty good. It's hard to tell just because I haven't seen the whole game. I have one scenario here with me using ranged units to judge from, but overall it felt pretty good, and I did like the defensive bonus that the forest gave you. This one as well was a little bit frustrating just because it felt like the Koreans had so many more units than I did, which is very true because they actually did just have a lot more units than me, but the defensive bonus from just being on top of the hill and them coming down into that valley with the river that gives them a combat penalty was very substantial, and it made defending this a lot easier, and eventually I was able to win. So overall, I do feel like the defensive bonuses do make a huge difference in this game. The terrain bonuses, or, perhaps terrain penalties as well. So I very much like how they are, and it does feel like it's a lot more, the battles in this game feel a lot more strategic than a lot of the other games that I have played. Another thing that was a little bit frustrating in this one was the fact that the Koreans had these mortar units that could just lob stuff at me pretty much endlessly on every single turn, and there was nothing I could do about it just because I couldn't get all the way back there to go and kill them. So that was something that was a little bit irritating, but I'm sure this wouldn't be as much of a problem in a normal game, because in a normal game, then, now that I know that these mortar units are really irritating, I'm sure I could probably build some of my own. But that was something that was a little bit irritating in this scenario. So that's all that was in Scenario 2 of the OpenDev stuff. So my main takeaways from this scenario was that, so for one, the combat is definitely very strategic. There are a lot of strategic choices that I feel like they matter a lot more in this game than they do in a game such as Civ. So in Civ, whether you are positioned on hills or not, it makes a little bit of a difference, but it doesn't feel like it's, potentially, or like every single time it's going to be game winning or game losing. But in this game, the terrain choices do matter a lot more. Just as I mentioned, from pretty much all of these scenarios that I played in this one, if I had the high ground, chances are I was going to win. If I didn't have the high ground, chances are I was going to lose. So choices like that make a very big impact in this game, and I think that is something that is good just because it adds a lot more of actually strategy to the battles. One thing that I wanted to mention was that these battles do feel a little bit long-winded for my taste, if you will. So these battles are going to go on for a lot longer, and it just feels like there's going to be a lot more units and stuff involved, so that's either a good thing or a bad thing depending on your taste. I'm not really sure which one I like more just yet. As I mentioned in the last episode, generally I like combat to be shorter, But it's going to take me playing actually the full game here in order to be able to decide whether or not I like the longer and more drawn-out styles of combat. But as I mentioned, drawn-out combat, it really leads to a lot more strategy that is able to be had and things of that sort, because you can bring in reinforcements, you can change your position up a lot more, and I think it is something that does add a lot more complexity to the game and makes it a little bit more challenging for newcomers to be able to get into it. So that's my other takeaway, kind of, is that I think that on the full release of this game, they definitely do need to have a pretty good combat tutorial in order to help new players get into this, because, as I mentioned, I got frustrated quite a few times while playing this because I just didn't understand why I was losing so badly whenever I would try to attack people. So definitely they need to have a pretty good tutorial in order to explain some of this stuff, or, you know, something like the Civilopedia or anything like that, in-game resources that help you understand what's going on a little bit better. So thank you everyone for watching. I have been the Saxy Gamer. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like. If not, feel free to dislike. If you're looking for some more Humankind content, feel free to subscribe. Let me know your thoughts on what you've seen from the Humankind combat in the comment section below. And if you're liking what you're seeing from Humankind so far. But thank you everyone, and I will see you in the next one.